What's good? This is Tico Tren, and I'm gonna talk about human nature too. This is gonna be like the social and cultural aspect of human nature. How to determine people based on uh, basically how to paint people or how to determine people based on cultural and social um, versions of human nature. Something I always find interesting about human nature is the people's ability to what's the word I'm looking for here? People's ability to human nature. People's ability to actually do and say stuff that people's interactions. What's up, that guy? People's ability to actually determine other people's. What's up, McTown to win? People's ability to understand and or determine groups of people based on what it is and what it is about them both culturally and socially that makes them that human being to be exact. And the thing about it is I'm going to go into the social, like I said, the social and the cultural. So it's going to be more or less like the fashiony portion of it for the most part. If you've ever noticed and you paid attention to people that are walking around you in public for the most part, a good example is um, if you ever notice a large majority of the society wears what they refer to as skinny jeans or skinny boy pants, basically. The neat thing about skinny boy pants is everybody within that group of people fall under a certain narrative and a certain underlying and across the board uh, behavioral pattern and or nature, or they have basically the base nature is the same when it comes to those two. I mean, granted, it might vary race to race, but for the most part, when it comes to race, it is across when it comes to a certain race. Like a good example, black people who wear skinny boy jeans. Most black people who wear skinny boy jeans were raised by single mothers. It's just facts. It is what it is. It might suck. You may not like it, but who were raised by most men who were most black men who were skinny boy jeans were raised by single mothers. It is what it is. The thing that I always found it funny is on top of that, a good portion of those. I mean, they're we'll say about 80-90% of men who wear skinny boy jeans were raised by single mothers. We'll say another 20 to 10% who wear skinny boy jeans were either raised by a drug addict or didn't have a strong male role model in their household. If they did have a male role model in their household, it is what it is. Something I've noticed about white men and society has noticed about white men who wear skinny boy jeans, a large chunk of them who wear skinny boy jeans tend to either A, if they fall into two categories in a larger chunk, either A, were raised by single mothers, or B, are drug addicts, which is actually pretty interesting and funny. A large chunk of white men who wear skinny boy jeans are either drug addicts or raised by single mothers. A small majority of white men who wear skinny boy jeans, we'll say about the 10%, 15-10% of white men who wear skinny boy jeans are trying to buy into black culture or trying to be something that they're not. Usually those kids tend to be suburbanites that want to be gangster. Something I've always noticed about those two people at those ends of the spectrum is you can always tell what they are, how they're going to respond, and their base human nature based on how they dressed, how they're perceived, how they carry themselves. They tend to have the same response when it comes down to it to anything. A lot of these men, either way, who are who wear skinny boy jeans all across the board will respond in an emotional manner. They will always have an emotional manner, no matter what the response is. They would always seem to act like a victim or act tougher than they really are for the most part. Either way, they're going to either be a victim or act tougher or more gangster than they really are. The funny thing about people who wear skinny boy jeans and who participate in that culture is white people are more accepting of people like that. Whereas if a me or a MGTOW in the wind were to walk down the street, they'd be more scared of us. They wouldn't sit next to us on public transport, and they would be more likely to run or try to avoid us at all costs because we don't fit that demeanor, which makes us much more scarier than the goofy ass black kids who wear skinny boy jeans. Even though they claim they're gangster, they're hood, they're all that in the bag, they're all this other shit. White people are less scared of them than they are of black people like me and MGTOW in the wind. It's just facts. You may not like it. It is what it is. It's society. Um, and the neat thing about the whole entire thing with the whole entire fashiony and the whole entire cultural social aspect of that is how they're perceived, how they carry themselves, and how people view them in public. Like I said, if me and MGTOW Win were to go somewhere, we will be seen more likely to be dangerous than if they were to go somewhere. And now that you said that, Los the Great, were you raised by a single mother? Los the Great, were you raised by a single mother? I rest my case. I rest my case. But you don't always have that crazy looking around MGTOW on the wing. You're usually pretty fine for the most part. And the thing about that is there's a fundamental difference between somebody like somebody who wears skinny boy jeans and somebody who wears regular jeans. Black men who wear regular jeans and dress a bit differently than the people in the skinny boy jeans and all the other goofy dress wear that they do, they're more feared in public than those guys are in public. Like I said, white people are more inclined to avoid people like me and the MGTOW to win than they are to avoid somebody like Los and Lonely Underscore for the most part is a good example of that. Because at the end of the day, they're not really seen as a threat to anybody for the most part. Hell, they're not even seen as a threat to regular black people. And that's typically how that works. That's basically society and the social construct and the cultural construct of that whole entire thing. Black men who wear skinny boy jeans are seen as less of a threat than men who wear regular jeans or baggier jeans for the most part. Baggier jeans is seen as much more dangerous. Skinny boy jeans is seen as acceptable. It is what it is. Um, that's typically how that works. And you can usually tell the difference between black men who were raised by single mothers and black men who were raised by two-parent households. It's that simple. Um, Based on how they dress and what they wear for the most part. Um, or their fashion sense is a good example of if they were raised by a single mother, if they were raised by a two-parent household. And that's typically how we that's typically how society perceives and betrays people based on how they're dressed, what they're wearing, and how they carry themselves for the most part. Another good example of something like that would be white women who act black. The funny thing about white women who act black is they try so hard to be black. And the funny thing about a lot of the white women who act black, a decent amount of white women who act black don't even date black men. A decent amount of white women who act black don't date black men in the least bit, which is actually pretty funny. Um, but the sad part about that is you could tell what she's going to say when she opens her mouth based on how she looks, which is how she looks, how she carries herself, and her whole entire demeanor. You already know what she's going to say. It's the same thing for women on Facebook. For a good, uh, uh, the sad part about that is it goes for women on social media. You don't need to actually see them in person to know how they're going to respond to your next answer. Because I've actually done this multiple times on social media, especially Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever the hell. I already know a woman's response before she even responds to what I'm going to say. I already know it. I already know it. Based on their characteristics, the type of shit that they post, the dumb shit they said in the thread, I already know what their natural response is going to be to me when I actually make the comment on the thing. I've done this multiple times because women will go, "You don't know me." I already know what you're going to say, and I already knew you were going to say, "You don't know me." It's going to be followed by this, that, and the other for the most part. This, that, and the other. And they usually get mad and they just storm off basically online wise. They just storm off. That's typically how that works. And knowing that type of shit helps you understand and cut to the whole entire BS without even having to have the argument, the conversation, to anything. It pretty much fast tracks you to the front of the fucking line when it comes to human nature. When you actually know what they're going to say, you know what their response is going to be, you know where all this shit is going to be and do and have. And the sad part about this, more women react this way than there are women on dating sites. It's just facts. The irony to that is another extreme of women who act that way too is are feminists and SJWs. They typically no matter what they do, what they say, what the topic is, you automatically know what their talking point's going to be. The same goes for the same goes for the same goes for black men who wear skinny boy jeans. You already know what their talking points are going to be. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much they try to act like they're new or they're fresh or they're different or what they say or what they do is totally different from what everybody else is doing. It's always going to be the same underlying response. It's always going to be the same typical NPC response. Just like feminists, just like SJWs have their same typical talking points and responses to every damn thing, which is actually pretty interesting. It's not that interesting because it's pretty boring and you pretty much already know. And it's like, oh my God, I seen this yesterday type shit. It's almost like watching a movie over and over and over and over again. That's typically how that shit works. That's typically, yeah, it's typically how that works. It'd be no different than, say, what's up, everybody? What's up? Let me say hi to everybody real quick. Let me run through this list because I'm not even looking at the damn screen. What's up, Los the Great? MGTOW to win. Shinobi Wan. Already said Los the Great. Lonely underscores in here. What's up? Corey and Janky. What's up, Janky? And what's up, Seeker? All this stuff I say to actually paint a nice picture of our social constructs that makes the people who they are. Now, the neat thing about human nature is it's either genetics or it's learned. It's either genetics or it's learned. There's a lot of things that a lot of people do that's genetics. There's a lot of things that a lot of people do that's learned behavior. Like a good example of genetics would be a lot of African American men inherit the same facial features or the same looks basically. Like a good example of that, I'm willing to bet any money out of all the men in this chat right now, how many of y'all actually make the same faces as your mother? Like how many of y'all got some of the same facial expressions as your mother? Let's just say when you're fed up with something, or you're sick of something, or when you're agitated with something, or your father. On the other hand, too, if you had a fatherly figure, how many of y'all have the same facial expressions or say facial responses to like agitation, stupid question, um, yeah, it's typically what it is. Like I'm willing to bet like a few of y'all probably have a lot of your mom's facial responses or facial expressions, like when she's fed up with you or you ask a stupid question and she just give you that look. Or a good example is MGTOW in the Wind. He has a lot of his father's facial expressions when you say something stupid to him. That's typically how that works. Um, and that's typically how that works. And at the end of the day, what a lot of people don't know is those are all learned. Those are all inherited features that your mom did or had, or let it be the tilt of the head, let it be the biting of the lip when you're like crocheting or knitting or shooting hoops or playing video games. Those are all inherited traits from a parent, basically. Um, that's typically how that works. Learn traits, learn behaviors, or learned nature. Human nature would be, what's up, Shinobi One? I already said Seeker. Okay, Seeker. What's up, Seeker? Shinobi One. I already said you. A learned social human nature. Learned social human nature would be how you dress. That's typically how that works. How you dress is basically learned from external stimuli like the TV, or you seen your friends wearing it, so now you got to get yourself a pair, or your favorite artist or your favorite hoop star wears it, and so on and so on and forth on the fourth line. Good example of that is I'm willing to bet any money. Um, Lonely underscore owns a pair of Jordans, and I'm willing to bet Los at one point of his life owned a pair of Jordans. If not, he still owns a pair of Jordans. It is what it is. It's just facts. That's typically how that works. Um, I can say without a shadow of a doubt, I know MGTOW in the Wind doesn't own any Jordans. Um, and I'm willing to bet that Seeker probably dresses in gray or black. Oh, but he just posted that now. That just popped up. Nice. Yeah. So yeah, that just popped up basically. Yeah, you do. And I know you own a pair of Jordans. I'm willing to bet. And that's typically how that works. It's based on whatever, lonely. It's okay. You've owned a pair of Jordans in your life. It's okay, pimp. um, but it's funny how like stuff like that actually help you to understand people a lot better. Stuff like that helps you to predict certain behaviors a lot better when it comes to people, or certain things, mannerisms, and or gestures that people are going to do, certain responses, certain outlooks, certain views that people have is based on if you were raised by a single mother or if you were raised by a single mother, or if you were raised by a I already said that, so I already knew you were going to say that, lonely underscore. I said that like 5 minutes ago when I was talking about the women. You don't really know me. Yeah, basically, yeah. You just basically proved my point right there when you said that. Um, but typically, natural responses are based on if you were raised by a single mother, you have a set guideline of responses that you're going to automatically do, versus if you're raised by a two-parent household, you have a plethora or many different responses that you're going to give, typically not like the responses that a person that was raised by a single mother would give you for the most part. It's typically how that works. Um, it's typically how that works in a nutshell. A MGTOW to win is not going to respond like a lonely underscore, and and a a seeker is not going to respond like a lonely underscore, and free agent peeps, aka Pence, is not going to respond like a lonely underscore. In the same token, free agents also not going to respond like Los the Great for the most part, and seeker won, and seeker seeker won and Seeker won and Shinobi won, and I mean Seeker won and Win basically will have the same group of responses for the most part. Um, I said you probably once owned a pair of Jordans. If you don't own one now, you probably own some Jordans in your lifetime. That's what I said. See, I already know what your responses are going to be next. Lonely underscore. You're pretty much proving my point here. Really do. You really are. Your responses are proving my point here. They really are. Um, it's the typical response that somebody on Facebook gives basically when they're raised by a single mother. There's always that same response. There's always that same response. It's the same five responses basically. Same five responses. Only thing that changes is the where the wording is in the whole entire sentence for the most part. That's the only thing that changes, but it's the same five responses. It's the same damn response. It's typically what it is. It's pretty much I already know your responses before you even put them out there. I already know what you're going to say before you put them out there, and I already know how you're naturally going to respond before you put it out there for the most part. Like a good example of that is the most random people in the chat right now that I have in the chat right now are Seeker, Shinobi Wan, and MGTOW to win, and Free Agent. Those are the most. But you owned a pair. That's just the point. You owned a pair. End of story. You owned a pair. See, now you're trying to backpedal out of the fact that that's how that works. There's no problem. I'm basically talking about human nature. The human nature is actually the title of this. Did you not see that when you clicked on this? Did you not see that at all? Um, so I basically did this in my last human nature video. You can ask everybody in the chat. Um, it's typical. It's typical on how that shit actually works, and it's going to be the natural responses and the natural defenses that you're going to use based on how you were raised, the type of parents you had when you were raised, and basically your upbringing for the most part. That pretty much gives me the guidelines on all your responses. This is like how they say in the manosphere about this is how they say in the manosphere about when they say NPC responses for the most part. What's up, Valhalla? Valhalla in the house. This is what they talk about in the manosphere about NPC responses. This is what they talk about when they talk about feminists or the SJWs and their NPC responses. You basically already know all their talking points, and you basically already know what they're going to say next based on what they've learned and how they learn to respond to things. It's typically what it is. The same goes for Like a good example of that is I've known Win for a long time personally, but Win is still random as hell. He might say orange one. He might say orange one time. He might say some other shit another time. He might say banana. He might say some off the wall shit. Either way, it's never a predictable response from Win for the most part. You never really get a predictable response from Win when it comes down to it. Another good example of a person that don't have a predictable response is Shinobi One. Shinobi One might say a lot of shit, but Shinobi One tends to not really say the same shit or stuff on the same lines multiple times within the same sentence, paragraph, and or stream for the most part. Um, Another good example of a person who doesn't. Another good example of a person who does that is Seeker. Seeker's very good at like being the most unpredictable person in the chat for the most part. I would give Valhalla a close second, and I would give MGTOW to win a close third on being the most unpredictable. Shinobi One is predictable depending on what type of mood he's in, depending on if you know if he did a video or not. Depending on if you know if he did a video or not, you could basically determine how Shinobi One is coming into your live stream based on the last video you've seen him do, for the most part. The problem with that is you actually got to go watch the video to determine the type, what Shinobi One you're going to get today, basically. What type of Shinobi One you're going to get today, and how he's going to respond to a lot of your shit in your video, basically, based on the last video he actually did. No, I actually did not take a jab at you. I was basically making, I'm not taking jabs at anybody. I'm actually basically mentioning everybody's name. You're not special. You're not special in the least bit. I've mentioned everybody's name in this live stream. Everybody's name in this live stream got mentioned. So you're not special. And that's typically how that works. And the funny thing about that, yeah, like you just said, grapefruit now. But yeah, it's typically, I said everybody's name in a live stream so nobody can feel special about me saying their name and me not saying somebody else's name. I said everybody's name in a live stream. So no, I'm not talking about just one person. I'm talking about everybody in general in this lovely live stream. I'm not bringing anybody into my argument. I'm basically explaining different people and their characters to you in this live stream. That's what this live stream is about. I'm gonna need you not to emote so much in this live stream, pimp. I'm gonna need you to actually follow. I'm gonna need you to actually pay attention so you can actually keep up with everybody else in this live stream. It's funny how Corey showed up later, but Corey actually knows what's going on. It's funny how Valhalla showed up later, but Valhalla knows what's going on. You see what I'm saying? You're the only one responding the way you are because it's you. Because basically I'm not dragging nobody into an argument. I'm basically talking about their base nature, their base human nature, and their base characteristics that makes them them. Ain't nobody talking about you. Ain't nobody dragging anybody into an argument. This is basically about human nature. That's how that works. You had to go to live chat to see some of this. Oh God, you're funny, Pence. But yeah, it's just stuff like that that basically gives you your nuance and lets people know who you actually are for the most part. I literally mentioned everybody's name before they before they literally showed up. You're not the only one. MGTOW the Win came up before he actually showed up too. So yeah. MGTOW the Win came up before he actually showed up too. So yeah. I'm gonna need you to calm it on down, literally. Anyway, Moving on. Um, it's stuff like that that actually gives you your nuance and lets people know who you are, characteristically wise, and who you are as a person for the most part. And the funny thing about that is that's typically how people judge you. That's typically how people learn you, and that's typically how people sell you things for the most part. Lonely, it doesn't matter. You owned a pair. Own up to it. End of story. Um, that's typically how that works. The thing about it is, this is typically how society and the big pharma companies and the big companies like your what's it called Procter and Gamble actually sell people things. They sell you based on your human nature, based on your psychology, and based on the household you were raised in, the type of things that you're interested in. This is before like YouTube and Google was even tracking your shit. Um, this is before YouTube and Google was even tracking your stuff. This is basically how they were able to sell you things successfully before YouTube and Google, basically based on your household, how you were raised, if you were low income, high income, if you were single mom, two parent household, shit like that for the most part. This is typically why women tend to be the larger targets of buying for the most part. Is if you ever notice back in the day when salespeople used to call the house, they used to ask for the lady of the house. There's a reason why they ask for the lady of the house and not the man of the house, because the chances of you actually getting the man of the house to actually buy something is very slim to none. The chances of you getting the lady of the house to buy something is very high. That's just human nature. You're more likely to get the lady of the house to buy something and convince her husband to go along with the plan. Um, that's typically how that works. You don't ask the husband of the house, you ask the lady of the house. Um, and the funny thing about that is, yeah, that's pretty much, yeah, like you said, free agent, pre information mining days, basically. That's typically how they basically targeted people. It's almost like if you were a criminal, if you were a thief, you got the group of people that you won't steal from. You got your actual mark. Your mark is the person who you've already followed up with, followed, and know, so you know how to get them, and you know their weaknesses, and you know their strengths, and you know how to get what you want out of them for the most part. That's your mark. The rest of the people aren't your mark. Those are just regular people you're going to let go because you're still trying to figure them out and you're still trying to learn them. It's the reason why. It's the reason why people. It's the reason why if you ever seen like an actual heist, it's the reason why the thieves case the crime scene, so they can get to learn the layout of the place for the most part, so they can know where to go in, how to go in, where the exits are, how to get out quickly, how long the cops respond, all this other great shit for the most part. That's human nature. This is why when somebody gets arrested, usually they're seen at the scene of the crime, especially if it's a robbery. If it's a robbery or a murder, like a planned murder, they're usually seen at the scene of the crime before, well before the crime took place for the most part, because they're casing the place or they're basically trying to get a layout of the land or trying to understand what they're going through. It's kind of like when you actually see people get arrested, then you see them on you see people get arrested on footage. I mean, you get see people get arrested, then you turn around and you see them on footage like a day ago or 2 days ago buying like trash bags and duct tape and shit like that. That's typically how that works. That's human nature. 9 times out of 10, a person that committed a crime probably bought the supplies a couple days prior to actually committing the crime. It's just facts. That's human nature. Most regular criminals actually buy the supplies not too long before they actually commit the crime. It is what it is. That's typically how that works. And It's stuff like that that actually gives you an open look at human nature for the most part. It gives you a book into human nature. It helps you cut straight from the back to the front. It helps you cut straight from the back to the front without any other bullshit or without bypassing shit. Man, ignoring all the other great shit going on, the flares, the flashbang, the emotions, the everything. It helps you cut straight to the front. That's typically how that works. That's typically how human nature works. And and it's funny how a good example of human nature and a good example of human nature is a good example of human nature is how everybody's naturally responding to the shit that I'm actually saying, the progression of how everybody's responding in my comment section based on what I'm saying. A good example of that is I'm going to say good example of that is MGTOW and the Winds randomness. You got you got Corey basically addressing two people at the same daggone time while addressing me too. Then you also have Seeker doing other things. And now you got MGTOW and the Wind talk about he needs another sword. And you got Lonely underscore questioning me still randomly. I've seen that response coming, even though I didn't pay attention to the screen. It's just shit like that. All these comments are basically what I know of you guys, and is basically your base human nature on how you interact and how you get along with people and yourself and a group of people that you know and strangers alike for the most part. It's typically how. Another good example of that, since he brought it up, is Lonely underscore said, I said his name before he got in the last stream. The only way you would know I said your name is if you had somebody listening in the last stream before you got here, or you actually was in the actual live stream when I mentioned your name. That's the only way you would actually know that I actually said your name. Either somebody in this live stream told you that I said your name, or you were actually in the live stream yourself when I actually said your name. That's typically how that works. Well, no, randomness is a good response system. Randomness actually keeps you from getting robbed or murdered, basically. That's typically how that works. If you have multiple routes home, people can't predict your route home, so they can rob your ass. That's typically how that works. You're going to want to take a different route home. That way, the person who wants to rob you or beat you or kill you or kidnap you won't be able to kidnap you based on they don't know your routine on your way home because you're unpredictable. That's typically how a lot of people accidentally get out of being kidnapped and or murdered and or happen to miss it by a minute, basically. That's typically how that works. By being able to actually randomize your route home, it makes you harder to actually be predictable, to actually be followed home, tailed home, robbed, beaten, raped, anything like that. This is typically why they tell people like this. I don't know if you ever went to college, Lonely underscore, but they typically tell you this when you go to college, that you should probably take a different route home. You should walk home with friends, or you should take a different route home every single time you come home, basically. That's typically how that works. And the shit like that actually makes it so is the fact that your unpredictability makes you a harder target to actually target. And just because you never happened to you doesn't mean it will never happen, Lonely underscore. I actually knew you were actually going to say that. Just because it never happened, that don't mean it won't. That kind of reminds me of a woman who I went to college with that said, I'll never be raped. This, that, and the other. This, that, and the other. 3 years later, she was raped. She was a rape victim. That's typically how that works. That's pretty much how that works. People who don't think shit will actually happen to them tend to be the motherfuckers who shit actually happened to the most. And the sad part about that is, even though feminists always talk about this rape culture and men raping them, the fact of the matter is, when a rape occurs, it's usually by a man that a woman already knows. He's in her circle. He basically already knows her. So he's basically going to commit the crime. The same goes for any other crime for the most part. If a crime's committed against a person, 90% of the times, it's a person you know. It's just facts. If a crime's committed against you, it's a person you know or know of for the most part. That's typically, I never said you were sensitive. I said basically I knew how you're going to respond. That's neither here nor there. The problem with that, though, is this is not a live stream. This is a podcast. That's the problem. And the thing about that is, if you notice what McTown the Wind said, he basically responded basically naturally. He doesn't believe that shit won't happen to him. He knows shit can actually happen to him, but that's why he takes the natural steps to actually prevent shit from actually happening to him for the most part. And the sad part about that is people. Oh, you're the one that said he was sensitive. Okay. And so it wasn't me. It was you might want to lonely underscore, you might want to talk to Los the Great. He's the one that actually called you sensitive. But for the most part, all I said is I pretty much knew you were going to say that about, you've never been robbed or murdered, basically, obviously. I already knew that was going to be your response. But the sad part about that is how people respond to external stimuli is a good example of how they'll be in an emergency, or they're a good example of how they will respond in times of stress or in times of need for the most part. So a person's response to somebody under normal circumstances is generally their response, or it generally shows how reliable the person is going to be in a stressful situation and or under pressure for the most part. That's typically how that works. So when people do stuff like that, you can actually tell how reliable a person they are based on their initial responses, or their initial outbursts, I should say. A good example of a person who will respond randomly to a good example of a person who actually will respond the same way that I would respond in the middle of a gunfight, even if I didn't have a gun, would be Valhalla. Valhalla is a good example of a person who will respond the same way I will in a time of need if you don't have a gun. Naturally. I would say third runner-up would probably be like McTown the Wind, because he has some military training, and it's just his pure randomness. It won't be exactly like me, but his randomness actually makes him funny and unpredictable. Basically, he's more likely to be the person who, if you got a gun in his face, he'll say banana or grapefruit or some shit like that, basically, or he'll make a joke about just shoot me, or I hope you kill me for me, basically. That's typically how McTown the Wind actually responds to shit like that. Me and Valhalla, on the other hand, we'll find anything and everything in our environment to actually even the playing field, or even the even if we're at a disadvantage, we will find every way to actually give ourselves an advantage over the person with the gun for the most part. That's typically how that works. Like I always said, if you're going to, it's just stuff like that for the most part. And that's typically how people respond and or Based on things I say, that's typically how I know how people are going to respond to me. A good example of that is the video I posted a couple days ago. A lot of people watched it. Some people knew what was actually going on with the video. Some people didn't. Some people actually ran off at the mouth in the comment section of that video. I'm not going to say any names, but MGTOW to Win, I believe, was the first person to call me and ask me what was actually going on and why I made that video. He was actually the first and only person who actually called me and or sent me some type of message asking me what was going on in that video. That's typically how that works. Like, he knows that all the information wasn't put into that video. He knows that there's other things going on than the shit that I actually said in the video for the most part. That's typically how that works. MGTOW to Win actually knew that there's other external stimuli that I didn't mention in the video. Because if you actually pay attention to my videos, there's a lot of subliminals that I put in my videos for the most part. There's a lot of subliminals that I put in my videos. So either A, you ask the proper question, or B, you just say the stupid shit in my comment section. Thank you, Valhalla. Where there's a will, there's a way. I thought you bounced out on me. But this is typically how that works. Because like I always say, and people always laugh when I say this, my channel is set up to troll trolls. Based on how my comment section rolls and based on how my video is set up, I can usually tell the people who didn't pay attention and the people who did pay attention, and then I can tell the difference between the people who learned nothing at all from the video and are asking me a lot of questions. And also know if you actually watched the whole entire video or not too, based on your responses. Based on your responses in the comment section for the most part. I could tell if you watched it, I could tell if you actually understood what was actually going on, and I can actually tell if you actually understand where I'm coming from based on your responses. Most people respond by either sending me a private message saying, Tico, what the fuck's going on? What do we need to do? That's typically how that works. Most other people, they'll just make snide comments in the comment section and say stupid shit for the most part. The funny thing about those videos that a lot of people don't know is there's a lot of esoterics and there's a lot of subliminal messages in those videos. There's a difference between not being around lonely underscore and not paying attention. Plus, because of StreamYards, I actually know who's actually in the comment section when I'm talking based on my security system. I actually know who's actually in the comment section already. That's basically how my security software is set up. I knew you were in the comment section. That's why I mentioned your name. So you can't say I didn't know you were around when indeed your YouTube channel actually popped up in my comment section when the numbers actually started jumping up. That's typically how that works. That's typically how that works. That's why I like using StreamYards, because I know who's in my comment section before they actually say some shit. Because the security system lets me know this shit. So you can't say I didn't say anything about you when you weren't there, when I knew you were actually there, actually see you pop up, and actually said your name then. Just because you weren't paying attention, that don't mean I didn't know you were in the comment section. I knew you were there. That's why I mentioned your name, because I knew you were there. Moving right along. But typically, it's stuff like that that makes it so that people are more predictable and they have a certain set of behaviors and characteristics and traits that they're going to reply to and say all on a regular basis. Um, you basically know what they're going to say based on how they're going to respond. You basically know what they're going to do based on how they were raised. You basically know what they're going to do based on their upbringing and their views on the world. Based on, you don't even have to have a long conversation with people anymore because people are such an open book anymore. People, people, and that's the funny thing about people that I notice. People are such an open book. They try to act like they're not an open book. When you actually talk to them and listen to what they say and listen to how they talk and listen to the shit that they say out of their mouths, you actually learn about them very quickly to actually know a lot about their character. You don't even need to be in the same room as a person. You don't even need to actually say much. You don't need the person doesn't even need to say much. Basically how they carry themselves, how they portray themselves, how they perceive themselves, and how they project their thoughts and ideas about certain things. Let it be race, let it be culture, let it be their upbringing, let it be where they live, where they don't live, where they don't want to live, stuff like that. You basically get a complete picture of a human being without even having to read the whole entire book. It'd be basically like if you read the what's what they refer to that? It's basically if you read the was it the prologue before you read the book, you basically get a general sense of what the book is about. That's typically what it is. This is how people can actually pick up on your traits. This is how people can actually know your telltales. This is how people know if a good example of that is human nature is like the FBI, CIA, FBI, security firms, high level security firms. They're good at reading facial expressions and responses for the most part. Let it be micro expressions. Let it be micro expressions, or let it be before you even open your mouth. They're good at reading micro expressions and or what they refer to as like your tail signs in your face, basically, and how you actually respond and where you look to. Let it be you look up to the right or look up to the left. One of the ways is you're recalling something. The other way is basically you're about to lie to them. Another one is if you look down before you say something. Another one is if you what you do with your hands and the positioning of your hands before you actually say it. And it's just shit like that that actually makes it so people know who you actually are. How you respond to people and how you act basically gives a clear picture of who you actually are. That's typically what it is. That's typically how it is. And the funny thing about that is, yeah, a good example. Another one is another tone of voice, basically, and how many times you actually respond or how many comments you actually left in a comment section is a good example of your character and who you are for the most part. And that's typically how that works. The last I checked, I think the person that commented the most in my comment section is Lowly underscore. The person that commented the second most was a toss up between Seeker and Pepe. However, how I know that is based on the fact that Seeker and Pepe are actually responding to Lonely underscore. That's typically how that works. And the fact that somebody actually got to explain the whole entire premise of this video, and this guy's actually going to agree with the whole entire video now, lets you know that people like to argue just to argue, and like they basically argue just to actually try to be different. Or it's basically like I was saying about the women on Facebook, where they say, "You don't know me. You don't know me. I know you enough to know you were going to make that response." That's typically how that works. That's typically how that works. And I basically did this last stream because I basically knew that I basically knew based on the time of day and what day it is who was actually going to show up to this live stream. I typically know how many people is actually going to show up at my live streams based on the day and time. That's human nature, pimp. That's human nature. I typically know, I learn different behaviors and lifestyles and habits of people based on the time of day I do things for the most part. I know when people can show up. I know when people are not going to show up. I know I do live streams based on who I know is going to show up, who I know is not going to show up for the most part. So at the end of the day, this live stream was a big ass social experiment, like it was last time, to actually show you how human nature actually works. That's typically how that works. That's typically how everything is. That's typically how the construct of the. That's typically how the construct of the world works when it comes to people. They already know who you are before you even came in the fucking door, basically. They already know who you are before you walked in the fucking door. They know what they can sell you. They know what you'll buy. They know what they can. They basically know everything about you when you walked in the door, based on how you carry yourself, how you're dressed, how you look. They know everything about you based on your way, the way you walk, the way you talk, the way you act, the way you swagger, the way you do everything, the way you dress. They know everything from that. It's just facts. So really say you can't really say that you're unpredictable when in fact I actually know what I can actually sell you. If you were to walk up to me, if I worked at a store. Another good example of that is I already know what I need to know about you based on your natural responses to what I'm saying. I know more about you than you believe I know about you. And the thing about that no, I said either you own some Jordans or you used to own some Jordans. Pay attention. Big difference. Because I said that to actually that guy, Los the Great, too. I said Los the Great either owned some Jordans or he used to own some Jordans. And I'm going to say the same thing about Lonely Underscore because I said that because I seen your name pop up in my last stream. And that's the neat thing about StreamYards. I know who's in here. I know who's not in here without them even having to say anything. This is why I love StreamYards, people. This is why I love StreamYards. And it's stuff like that that actually makes it so that when you actually do and say things, it makes you more predictable. It makes you more susceptible to stuff. It makes you more easy. It makes you much more easier to actually manipulate, control, bend, and get to do whatever you want to their very will. Your overall human nature can actually get people knowing your human nature. They basically know your limits. They basically know how how to get you to do what they want to do without even trying. It's basically like how the Democrats get black people to always vote for them. It is what it is. You're still arguing a point that's pointless, the only underscore. You used to own a pair of Jordans. In the story. You used to own a pair of Jordans. That was the whole entire topic. You used to own a pair of Jordans. You're missing a whole entire point. Um, and it's just stuff like that that, like, you tend to understand people more, and you tend to learn more about people based on things like that, simple things like that, and simple responses like that. Like I said, my channel set up to troll trolls. So if you're in my comment section saying stupid shit, I basically no, either either if you paid attention to the video or not, if you watched the whole entire video or not, or if you actually got the complete message of the video or not. That's typically how that works. And the funny thing about that is there's a lot of people who say things and do things and don't realize that they're actually telling on themselves or giving themselves away for the most part. And a lot of people do it all the time. And it's not shocking, and it's not in the least bit funny. And it's very sad when you actually see it. It's very, very sad when you actually see it. When people respond in the manner that they respond in, because it's like, dude, that was so easy. A caveman could have did that. Or that was so easy. I think a 6-year-old could have manipulated that situation without even trying. And that's typically how I understand things. And that's typically how I look at people, based on shit they do, shit they say, how they carry themselves, and how they act for the most part. There's a fundamental difference between people who actually carry themselves in a proper manner and people who actually don't carry themselves in a proper manner. Then there's also the difference between townhouse niggas and fake townhouse niggas. There's also a difference between hood niggas and fake hood niggas. That's typically how that works in life. That's typically how life is. Especially in the black community. There's the townhouse niggas, there's the fake townhouse niggas, and then there's the hood niggas and the fake hood niggas. It's typically how that works. You can basically determine who a person is, what a person is, based on how they respond, who they respond to, and why they respond that way, and in the manner in which they respond. So, whenever it comes down to it, and whenever people actually let me end this right now. Did you at one point in your life own a pair of Jordans? Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no? It don't matter if somebody bought them for you or who bought them for you. Did you own a pair of Jordans in your life? Yes or no? And MGTOW to win, I want you to answer the same question. Have you ever owned a pair of Jordans? Yes or no? McTown to win, and Lonely Underscore, answer the question. Have you ever owned a pair of Jordans? It don't matter if somebody got them for you or not. It don't matter if you owned a pair of Jordans. The question is, did you own a pair of Jordans? Yes or no? What's up, Red Pill Fred? I already know he admitted to actually having a pair of Jordans. I have, yeah. He admitted to that already. I was waiting to see if he turned around and actually lie and say he didn't, because he's already responded that yes, he's had owned a pair of Jordans in his life. That's typically how that works. Um, so no, you can't say I was making false things up about you when in fact I know you owned a pair of Jordans. It don't matter if your mama bought them for you, your grandmama bought them for you, your girlfriend bought them for you, your baby mama bought them for you, your neighbor bought them for you, the church guy bought them for you. You owned a pair of Jordans. It's just facts. Facts don't care about feelings at all. And I'm gonna ask Red Pill Fred this. Red Pill Fred, did you ever own a pair of Jordans? Yeah, he actually put I have. Yeah. See? That's typically how that works. That's typically how that works. I've never owned a pair of Jordans. Ever. Not the flip flops, not the sandals, not the shoes, not the nothing. I've never owned a pair. And there's several other people in this comment section who's actually never owned a pair. You could tell how they were raised based on if they actually owned a pair of Jordans or not in their closet for the most part. It don't matter who bought them for you. It's a matter of did you own them at one point in your life, now or then. That is all that matters. That is all that I said. That is it. And that's typically how that works. And like I said, based on shoes and based on clothing, you can actually determine who a person is, and the difference in mannerism is how a person carries themselves based on the way they dress, the shoes they wear or not wear, and if they were raised by a single mother or a two-parent household, or if they were raised by a single father. There's a difference between if you're raised by a single father or a single mother also. That's basically what I said. No, actually, no. What I said about you was 100% right. I only said like three things about you. I need you to stop. And all three things are right. You were raised by a single mother, you owned a pair of Jordans, and you wear skinny boy jeans. That's all I said about you. 100% right. 100% right. Actually, that's what I actually brought up as an example at the beginning of this live stream. If you weren't too busy not paying attention like you normally do. But yeah, it's just shit like that that actually, yeah. And the sad part about that, Seeker's a trip. But yeah, you can literally tell the difference based on that. And the sad part about that, you could tell based on age how that works and how it was actually done. Older people that were raised by single parents tend to have more of a filter or more of an understanding and don't ask a billion questions and or go off in the comment section. Those are the older people who weren't raised by single parents. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some outliers to that, but for the majority, based on the time and age range, which is usually like Gen Xers to older, they tend to don't really respond the same way. Uh, Everything after latchkey kids on, they respond in a certain manner. And I already knew you were actually going to say that because I don't see your father, knowing you, Red Pill Fred, I don't see your father buying you no damn Jordans. I see your mom buying you some Jordans before your mother buying you some Jordans. That's typically how that works. And I actually said something about that earlier about like when it's back in the day before they had the mining of information, they basically knew who to go to in the household, and that was your mom, the lady of the household, basically, to sell her anything that she wants, because they knew if they can get the lady of the household convinced, she could convince the whole entire household to do what they need her to do for the most part. She'll convince your dad, she'll convince you, she'll convince everybody in the household because she's the lady of the house. That's how that works. That's basically the premise of what I was actually talking about. XYZ. That's pretty much what it is. Because I don't see, based on your videos and the way you carry yourself, I don't see your dad buying you Jordans. I see your mom buying you Jordans before I see your dad buying you Jordans. Your dad probably was one of them people that said over my dead body. Or not while I'm alive, basically. Something to the extent of that for the most part. I'm willing to bet. Your dad was pretty much steadfast and very hard line, and shit wasn't going down on his watch, basically. That's typically the type of father you have, Red Pill Fred. Shit wasn't going down on his watch, and one of his favorite lines was probably over his dead body or something to the extent of that for the most part, or not while I'm alive. I'm willing to bet that. Yeah, and that's pretty, and that's another topic that I'm going to bring up in a later date and time for the most part. But yeah, you can literally tell when a woman has suffered some type of either sexual abuse or abuse for the most part, younger, especially if she hasn't got the proper care, especially if she hasn't got the proper care to actually deal with it. See, I called it. See, I called it. Yeah, you can actually tell when a woman's actually been abused or a person's been abused and they haven't quite dealt with those residual that residual or that abuse when they were younger, basically. They haven't worked it out with anybody, therapist or anybody, or talked it out with anybody, psychologist, whatever, for the most part. So you can usually tell when a woman's actually been abused. And usually women like that you want to stay far away from until they learn to work out their problems or their feelings or whatever underlying problems they got going on with them. And sadly, in this day and age, a lot of women actually suffer from some type of abuse, let it be mental, physical, or sexual or emotional abuse for the most part in this day and age. And the sad part about that is a lot of them are good at hiding their scars, and a lot of them are good at, portraying themselves in a certain light, because you also got to take into consideration too, this is also human nature. Women worry about their self-image and how they look to other people. So therefore, if they look like a emotional hot mess, they're going to be less inclined to interact with public and or put that foot forward. They're going to put their best foot forward, or as I always call it, the representative forward for the most part. That's typically how that works. That is typically how that works. So yeah, I kind of figured your dad was going to be. I knew your dad was a strict dude. I knew it. But yeah, it's typically how that works, and it's typically human nature in a nutshell for the most part. And stuff like that actually gets you to actually understand another human being better. Shit like that gets you to understand the difference between a red pill Fred or another guy, basically, for the most part. Um, a good example of that is red pill Fred is less likely, as an African American, red pill Fred is less likely to commit a crime than another random African American in the hood, basically. It's just facts. It is what it is. It's the statistics. It's pretty much how it works for the most part. Like, there's other African Americans that's more likely to commit a crime, but Red Pill Fred is less likely to commit a crime in America than any other black man. But I'm willing to bet any money When Red Pill Fred walks down the street, white people clutch their purses and walk across the street from him. I'm willing to bet that. Because how Red Pill Fred carries himself, he doesn't carry them like the other normal people of society, pop culture society for the most part. So they perceive him as more dangerous than Los the Great. Or like I was saying before, they perceive him as more dangerous than Los the Great and Lonely Underscore for the most part. He's actually seen as a bigger threat than those two for the most part. And that's typically how that works. And I'm willing to bet any money, more white women are more likely to approach Los the Great than Red Pill Fred. Or more women in general, more white women or women from like Chinese descent or Indian descent are more likely to approach Los the Great before they approach Red Pill Fred, just on some random whim. That's typically how that interaction works. That's human nature 101. Red Pill Fred doesn't fit the stereotypical African American man that white people are used to seeing. Los the Great fits the typical African American man, and Lonely Underscore fits the typical African American man that white people see and betray and know very well and more comfortable with. That's typically how that works. It's human nature and it's sad, but it is what it is. And it's stuff like that that makes it so and it makes it so that like that's how society works. That's typically how everything is. And it is what it is. It sucks that happens to certain black people, and it sucks that more people are more likely to go around other black people than a certain group of black people, but it's a social norm. Lonely Underscore and Los the Great fit the social norm. Me, MGTOWN the Win, and Red Pill Fred don't fit the social norm. So white people are typically going to be more not scared, more aware when we're actually in their presence than they are when Los the Great and Lonely Underscore are in their presence. Because we don't fit the social norms. We don't fit the social norms in the least bit. And that's typically how that works. And it sucks, but it is what it is. And I always said stuff like that. Like I was saying earlier in the stream, if I was to ride public transportation, I don't need to put a bag or anything in a seat next to me because there's a 98% chance that a white person is not going to sit next to me because they scared. It's just facts. Now, if Los the Great's riding public transportation, they're more likely to sit next to him. If Lonely Underscore is riding public transportation, they're more likely to sit next to him. It's just facts. That's typically how that works. It is what it is. That's pop culture. You and Lonely Underscore are pop culture. Y'all are the epitome of pop culture. This is why y'all get approached the most by random people. This is why, and this is also why me, MGTOWN the Win, and Red Pill Fred are probably more unapproachable than you guys. Look at Red Pill Fred's face in his picture. Does that look like a person you want to approach in public or see in a dark alley? He looked like he'll fuck something up. Think about that. Like, he looked like he'll fuck something up. Why would you want to approach somebody that looked like they'll fuck you up, basically? Same goes for MGTOWN the Win. Same goes for me. Granted, something I do know is when I'm actually just speaking all Spanish, I tend to be a more approachable person. That's just facts. Let's just say they look like Drake. They look like Drake or Migos or, Lil Yachty or all those people, basically, for the most part. Los looks like Drake. I'll say Lonely Underscore looks like pretty much their other rappers in a rap game for the most part. Those are the people that they're used to seeing. Those are the people that they're used to seeing. They're not used to seeing people like me, Red Pill Fred, and MGTOW to win. They want to see some dreads, or they want to see a close shave, light skinned black guy. It's just facts. They want something to look like Drake, or they want something to look like Migos, or Future, or Little Yachty, or somebody like that. Takashi. They want somebody that looks like that for the most part. That's typically how that works. That's what they're comfortable with. That's the albums that they buy. That's how that works. That is exactly how that works. And true, MGTOW to win. It's the same cover clothes basically. And like they always say, like they say, clothes pretty much make the man. And the sad part about that, a lot of people who were raised by single mothers, clothes definitely make the man because you basically know what you're dealing with based on how they dressed. That's typically how that works. That's pretty much the nature of the beast. That's the nature of the Western world. They're only going to go what's more popular and what's more acceptable. White people are only willing to approach what they see in the media. They're not going to approach the rest of us. It is what it is. And like you said, yeah, you're an Eagle Scout conservative, basically. Yeah, you're seen as much more. You're seen as less approachable or much more unbendable, basically. So they're not going to approach you or try to get you to do something or try to ask you to do something based on your demeanor and how you look for the most part. The same goes for MGTOW to win. They're not going to approach you to try to ask you to do something because they know it's going to be too much work to get you to do it. It's going to be way too much fucking work to get you, MGTOW to win, and me to do something when in fact they could just go to Los or Lonely Underscore and ask them a question, and they're more likely to actually oblige for the most part. It is what it is. That's basically how that works. That's all it is in a nutshell. That's all it is in a nutshell. What white people are comfortable with, and what black people or white people are comfortable with, and what white people aren't comfortable with. And the sad part about that is 9 times out of 10, when a white person says they got black friends, they're referring to somebody like Lonely Underscore or Los the Great. If they tell you they got a black coworker, they're referring to me, MGTOW to win, somebody that looks like me, MGTOW to win, or Red Pill Fred. If they say they got black friends, like I said, it's Los and Lonely Underscore for the most part, is the typical people that they would say they got black friends for the most part. That's how that works. That's the social construct. This is why you can get white people to roll for certain people and not roll for other people. There's a reason why a lot of white people were on board for Aubrey and Floyd and not on board for Castillo and the other guy. They're two totally different black guys. They're two totally different black guys. We're two totally different black guys. We're cut from two totally different cloths. That's typically how that works. And the sad part about that is if you actually talk to a MGTOW to win or a Red Pill Fred, you're more likely to get more shit done and more you're more likely to get more shit done and more questions answered if you just stop and talk to us. That's how that works. And the sad part about that, Red Pill Fred looks like a seasoned vet. He looked like he could probably fix your house, your car. He probably knows how to fix your lawnmower. He could teach your children how to box. He could teach your children how to fight. And he could teach your children how to probably do some other crazy shit like tie and all this other great shit. It's typically what it is. Like, he's probably a wealth of knowledge, basically, to pass on to children. It is what it is. Los the Great, on the other hand, he'll teach you how to cut some hair. He'll cut your hair. And there's certain other things that he's not finna do. Basically. Whereas the rest of us, we're skilled in all these other areas, and half of us are like pros in those areas for the most part. Whereas like you got like Los and Lonely Underscore where they're just jacks of all trades for the most part. I mean, don't get me wrong, like Red Pill Fred probably knows a lot of shit, but Red Pill Fred's probably like a master in those areas for the most part that he knows. Or he probably knows a guy that can actually do it better than him. You see what I'm saying? Same goes for MGTOW the Win. MGTOW the Win would tell you I can fix anything with wheels on it or an engine or a motor. But if you start talking about computers, I'm going to have to direct you to this person. That's typically how that works. Church. It's just stuff like that. Plus, I've noticed with the difference between me, MGTOW the Win, and Red Pill Fred, and Lonely Underscore, and Los is those two are in the music. They both make beats and music and shit like that for the most part, and produce beats and shit like that. It is what it is. Us old heads, me, MGTOW the Win, and Red Pill Fred, we tend to do other things like cars and maybe some electronics, and we'll fix some shit. We'll fix the house. We'll repair like whole entire fucking siding, shingles, and roof things. The fucking chimney. The whole 9 yards, basically. That's based on his time. That's based on the time and where we grew up at, basically, for the most part. How we grew up in an environment that we grew up in. That's typically how that works. So this is basically what I was trying to actually get across and get people to understand is human nature when it comes to black people, the differences in black people and how they were raised and how they carried themselves for the most part. I would like to thank Lonely Underscore for participating in this and helping me to actually get my point across. For the most part. But yeah, I know you're into pit bulls and roosters. That's typically a new age thing. I'm more into bulls, actual oxes and chickens, and when it comes to farming, oxes, chickens, and sheep and goat for the most part is my bag for the most part. Rice, grain, and other shit like that for the most part. And sugarcane. That's typically my background in farming. But yeah, that's typically what I was trying to make this podcast about, and to better understand human nature. And this podcast went way longer than I needed to go longer, thanks to somebody in a lovely chat. But yeah, I know about those horses. My daughter has one. But yeah, like all I wanted to talk about was human nature. That's all I wanted to talk about. I didn't want to make it any more complicated than it needed to be. I wanted to break it down for people. Apparently, I got to break it down for people based on the one guy that happened to show up in the lovely chat. But I'm going to end that last stream because it went a lot longer. I'm going to end this podcast because it went a lot longer. And fuck it, I'm just going to call it a live stream because it's an hour and 30 minutes. Y'all have a blessed night and be good. Improve yourselves, make yourselves the better versions of yourselves. If you're still in lockdown, exercise regularly, eat healthy, and take care of your bodies. So when you come out of lockdown, you won't look like your neighbor who got fat. Basically, try to keep in shape as much as humanly possible. That's all I ask. Deuces. Good night, everybody.